Welcome to Both Sides of the Mic. This is March 10th, and in the hot seat this time we have Jaden Frigo. Did I pronounce that right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. I've not met Jaden before. Um, Jaden's from Australia, and we're going to find out what makes Jaden tick, or not tick. So the question that everybody wants to know is when was the last time you had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
Um, Never, so that's an easy one.
Oh, gee, are you allergic?
No, I actually don't know anyone in Australia who has peanut butter and well, we would call it jam rather than jelly, but I don't.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's not a
He's
common sandwich over here.
he's a Vegemite guy.
I was going to say I was racking my brain trying to think about what's that plastic stuff they use in Britain and Australia.
I wouldn't call
Okay,
it plastic. I'd call it car grease, but much of
yeah,
muchness.
it's like my definition for ouzo. It's a combination of Vicks vapor rub and kerosene. Um, I never know whether to drink it or wear it. Uh, so uh, let's start out with the calling part. A lot of us around the world, we don't know what goes on in Australia for square dancing in the terminology and whatnot. Instead of tips, you have brackets.
Mm.
And any idea why it's called brackets?
I've heard about 10 different theories over the years. I don't really know the correct answer. One thing I will say though, which might explain it, for a long time in Australia, there were three numbers done in a bracket as opposed to two in the rest of the world. Usually in Australia, it would be a singing call to start the bracket, then a hoedown in the middle, then another singing call. Some places you do the hoedown first, then two singing calls. And in Western Australia, I know for quite a while, they'd do two singing calls and then finish with the hoedown. And then they would promenade at the end of the hoedown, they'd promenade the dancers off the floor. So you'd get
Hmm.
to, the 3 minute 30 marky hoedown, and then you'd ask the dancers to promenade off the floor. You wouldn't say bow to your partner corner two and, thank you square. But in Australia, yeah, three numbers was the norm. And I don't know if that has anything to do with why it's called a bracket or not. But also the other thing which might help explain it is because I've never known the true reason why they're called tips in America. I've heard theories as to why they're called tips, but I've never known what the actual true answer is. But tipping is not something which is commonly done in Australia. If we go out to a restaurant, we don't tend to tip. It's not because we're cheap, it's just because we
You
tend to
cheat.
pay hospitality staff a good wage. So the word tip is not a common word in Australia in that regard. So yeah, I've never known the exact reason why it's called a bracket, but
Hmm.
um,
Well, I guess it's what goes in between. There's a start and a stop, and so you put a
mm,
bracket on each end. Yeah,
mm.
the old traditional square dancing used to be like three songs, basically, and I don't know why they call it tips, other than no, I have no idea. That's something
Well,
we'll have to check. Maybe Buddy Weaver could tell us. Uh,
I
he's
can actually tell a funny story from that though. Was in Australia about 20 years ago or so, when a lot of American callers were coming here, a handful of clubs thought we're going to go call from tips rather than brackets. But of course, no dancer he knew what that meant, and so you get a flyer advertised, say a mainstream dance with two plus tips for the night. And some dancers asked, well, two plus tips, is this going to be a workshop where they give us two tips on how to dance? Or
hmm.
so there was some real confusion when the word tip started to get used here.
I like the idea of no tipping at restaurants. I think I might move to Australia. uh, So we'll stay on the square dance part of it for a little bit, so we get to know your square dance background. Uh, Tell us how you got into square dancing and then ultimately into calling.
Well, I was born into square dancing. My parents are both square dancers, have been for 30, 40 years. So I went to a square dance when I was about 6 weeks old and was just born into it. So I started dancing at 6, 7 years of age. And calling wise, at that age, I actually didn't really enjoy dancing that much. Because I was partly because you had all the sort of very well-meaning grandmotherly types who would come up and say, "Oh, isn't that a cute little, cute young man dancing?" And yeah, I just didn't really enjoy dancing. So when the option came up that I could go and call instead, it appealed to me. And our club was running an amateur callers night, which I don't know if that's a term which is used over there or not, but it was whenever any dancer could get up and have a go at calling. So I had a go, and yeah, I just got into it from there. But I spent quite a few years as a trainee caller. And then at the age of about 12, I started to get involved in club calling and going from there. So yeah, I was quite literally born into square dancing, and I've never known life about square dancing, and I probably never will. So I'm happy about that.
uh, have you danced to Brian before?
Brian Clark.
Yeah.
No, no, our paths have never crossed. I've heard plenty of stories about his calling, but I've never danced to him live.
Funny stories. Okay. Well, you might like to dance some of his calling. Everything you've heard is probably true. Uh, it's a good thing I can mute Brian. He can't holler at me. Well, he can, but I'm not going to let him. Anyhow, so and how is your approach to calling? Do you do psych calling modules, reading, whatever?
I tend to be always subscribe to the idea that you never use one method as a call, you use a combination of all the methods. If I had to pick the dominant one, I'd say I'm dominantly a psych caller, but I think as most callers do, I use a combination of all those methods.
Yeah.
But I do believe in having some good pre-written material there, especially some good get-ins, get-outs, etc. I think as a caller, psych calling is good, but you need to have some pre-worked out stuff to put on a polished performance at times as well.
Yeah.
And
Do you do much with calling where you end a sequence and they're all at home? That over the past 15 to 20 years has sort of taken a hold with some callers where every sequence they do, they end up at home. Okay.
I would say that's been not so much a thing in Australia as it has been overseas. For me, it's about variety. Some finishes at home are very good. I probably actually got into a phase where I used to finish 90% of sequences at home. And then there was actually a conversation with Mike Sikorsky when he was here calling for me quite a few years ago, where Mike advocated that there's more thrill for the dancers in resolving with an Alaman left or a right or left grand than there is saying you're home.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just think variety is good. But yeah, I'd probably say, yeah, I don't think the finish at home has taken over quite as much in Australia as it has overseas.
Okay. I'm not sure that it's very predominant necessarily, but some of the YouTube things I watch from time to time. Uh, in fact, Mike was calling a hot hash at one of the festivals, and pretty much everything was your home, which I found that interesting in the hot hash because when I do hot hash, I don't keep track of where people are. It's just, you know, do all this stuff fast and get home. Do you have any particular sequences that you've developed that you really like and would be willing to share with us?
Um, I couldn't actually tell you the choreography I have in my head, which stuff I developed myself and which stuff I saw other callers use and made a note of over the years. I was always taught when I first started that no matter how experienced you are, you carry a notebook with you because you never know when you're going to see another call or even just call something yourself. You think, gee, that was good. I'm going to make a note of it now. So I still carry my 20-year-old notebook around, which has every sequence that I've ever seen, which I liked.
Wow.
I like choreography, which is a little bit different, but not particularly challenging. I think one of the great flaws in square dancing over the last 20 years, I think we've become too challenging. And I think we've lost track of the fact that we can be interesting without being too challenging. So I like one of my favorite partner line get outs, which is pretty commonplace. I know a lot of callers are using it, but it's from a partner line, boys extend to a wave, swing through, center boy trade, center boy run, new center boy hinge, everybody man left. It's an interesting little get out, but it's not tough. And I favor I just favor material which is something a little bit different, but it's not too mentally challenging. And we've had quite a few of our leading Australian callers. Many of you will know people like Steve Turner, Barry Wanson, Brian Hotchkiss as the starting point, who have all been masters for a long time at that craft of making choreography interesting and different, but also not being mentally challenging. So we're lucky as younger callers in Australia that we've had good people to learn from in doing that.
Yeah, that's for sure. I like that sort of an approach, and it seems to be more difficult. I mean, the concept is simple, but the execution is not that easy. Do you
Well,
do much with symmetrical, or what do you call it? Non-symmetrical.
I've always described non-symmetrical choreography as a handy gimmick. For me, that's all it is. I've seen callers who have used it and used it and used it and used it to the point where the dancers have completely lost interest in it. Look, I think there's a nice wow factor if you put 4 boys into one group of 4 girls in the other group and play around with it. I think there's really good wow factor in that. But again, something's only surprising if you do it occasionally. So
Mm-hmm.
I've seen, I don't know if it's common over there or not, I've certainly seen quite a few educational sessions in Australia and where there's a whole session spent on teaching callers how to asymmetrically sight call, which it's fascinating knowledge, but to me it's not particularly usable. I have learned how to do it as a sight calling now, but I still tend to just utilize essentially a couple of pre-worked out routines for it because for me that's all you need.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think with any of these things, a little bit goes a long way. It's like you say, if you do it constantly, it's no longer a treat. It's like, we know you can do it.
I think
there.
it's like anything, especially choreographically as callers, the secret to being an effective caller is knowing exactly how much to use of each item.
Mhm.
We have a lot of um, tricks up our sleeve. Most callers have a lot of material in their kit bag, and I think what defines the best callers and the not quite as good callers is not the material they have or the knowledge they have, it's how they utilize what they have. And something like that, if you use it smartly, it's a wonderful trick. If you use it too much, the dancers are going to get bored pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so um, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I'd say very much an introvert unless I'm calling, where I'm more of an extrovert.
Right. So when you go
Um,
to a dance, if you're not calling, you kind of blend in.
yeah, I actually blend in as blend in a good way.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I always enjoy, especially calling in, overseas or where you're calling to people you never met before. I always enjoy being able to walk around, especially if there's rounds on before or something, and getting to know everybody. Because apart from anything else, you generally then get to know who the people with a bit of personality are, who you can have a bit of fun with as you're calling, and it's good to go around and meet people. But I'm not a particularly outgoing person at all off a microphone, but put a microphone in my hand and you change.
Hmm.
Um, I've
Well,
always described that I was calling before I was actively involved in social circles, so I'm better at calling than I am at anything else.
yeah, yeah. If it weren't for the people calling, it'd be a blast. Eh? That's awful to say. Uh, no, the people are the most fun. It's amazing what can happen. Um, so, other than the buckets of money you make off of calling, what do you do with as a actual career?
Calling. No, I'm a full-time caller.
Oh,
Although in Australia, being a full-time caller, we don't have a lot of major weekend events still on the calendar, and most of them do not um, attract big numbers to make a lot of money. So, as a full-time caller, 90% of what I do is based around calling in my home groups, and weekends and traveling is the handy bonus. But yeah, so I'm a full-time caller, but that's from doing my home groups.
okay. Yeah.
Mm.
I
And
think people would be surprised that that's true of many of the uh, well-known callers in the States as well. There's any number of us that have done other things to fill in the gaps. But other
mm,
than that, a lot of club work, home
mm,
club stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, I just think, especially nowadays, it have activities changed, and I know a lot of callers who essentially now, yeah, if you're doing it full time, you need to make your money at home, and traveling to do weekends is almost the bonus for traveling, not the bonus for money making nowadays, unfortunately. But um, yeah, I at one stage I ran 9 to 10 groups a week
Hmm.
at home. At the moment, we've got 5 groups a week, and yeah, we're still we're still very much kicking back post COVID.
Okay. Yeah.
Where um, we've been pretty lucky in Australia. Our numbers haven't dropped a huge amount post COVID. We were getting the numbers were the last national convention before COVID. We had about 550 people at, and last year's national convention, which was the first big one post COVID, we had almost 500 at. So our numbers haven't actually diminished very much.
Hmm.
But it's just taken some time to rebuild. And actually, we're getting more people to big weekends and special events now than we did before COVID.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. In some ways, I think COVID actually, I hate to say that it helped, but the vacancy of having socialization for a couple of years, once we kind of were let loose, quite a few people were looking for something to do. And I've found, at least in a lot of places that I go, that we're getting more and more people out saying, boy, I wish I'd seen this sooner, before COVID and all that. But yeah. Anyhow, yeah, go ahead.
But I also think with our experienced dancers and also as callers, I think a lot of us appreciate the activity more than we did pre-COVID. I think when pre-COVID, a lot of us just got stuck in our ways a bit, was not being able to do it for a couple of years. We realized that we really don't want to lose this. So I think there's more enthusiasm and energy and activity now here in Australia than there was pre-COVID. So I'm not gonna say that COVID was a good thing, but as far as making the most of a bad situation,
Mm-hmm.
I think we've been able to do that, which is good.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think, it sort of is making us go back to wind in the face dancing rather than the Sudoku type. How far off can we do this? How close to the edge can we take the dancer? And then a few of them fall off the cliff, and too bad. But yeah, I like the idea of doing different things, like you say, but interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it saddens me because ultimately the activity is square dancing, and one thing which I think we're fortunate about in Australia is even when we get to say A2 here, the dancing is no different to what it is at mainstream as far as energy and enthusiasm. And we still promenade, we still Alaman left. We don't just slap hands and go back to home, and we don't walk backwards 4 steps rather than promenade and all that sort of thing. We haven't. There's not very much C1 dancing in Australia, but even the small amounts of C1 we have, again, it's danced the way you dance mainstream or plus. And I just, I think it's a shame to see the activity, especially for higher levels, become quite a robotic thing, because that's really, to me, we've lost the aspect of dancing. And this is one of the reasons why I said earlier, I favor interesting material as opposed to really challenging material, because if you've got to stop and think, well, you're not smoothly dancing if you're stopping and thinking. So, if you've got dancers who, and like all of us have seen videos of tech squares in America where you've got some of the brainiest people in the world. Well, they can think on their feet and they can dance smoothly and dance super hard material. If you've got dancers who can do that, then brilliant, go right ahead. But for me, if you're calling to a general floor and the dancers have got to stop and think every 2 calls, then I think you're losing the point of why we're actually there to dance.
Yeah. Well, I'd break it down to even another step and say it's socializing, and if you're not happy with the dancing part, then the socializing crumbles.
100%.
Yeah, of course I enjoy challenge as well, but it's a different kind of an activity, really. I mean, it is nice to be able to call C3 and 4 where the dancers are actually moving, and you don't have to stop and explain anything. They just know. If anybody wants to see some really good dancing at that sort of a stage, check YouTube out, check Vic Theater, and check C4, and you'll see a lot of dancing at that level. But yeah, that's a good point.
I always found it interesting, though, the way I've always measured have you still got the dance element is the tendencies around the world on singing calls. And in Australia, certainly again, we don't really have an active C1 dancing in Australia outside of some very small pockets. There's no actual C1 clubs, I don't think, in Australia now. But at A2, there's not one club or caller in Australia who doesn't do a singing call and patter each tip at A level. Whereas traveling around in the world, there's not that many parts of America I've been to where singing calls are common and advanced. And to me, actually, again, for me, the height of a singing call was that's the time where you can dance, you can relax, you can enjoy yourself. And whether I'm calling mainstream, basic, SSD, or calling A2, I still want to have the singing calls people can dance.
Mhm.
And I found an interesting experience when traveling in parts of America where I was calling C1. And I said to the dancers at a couple of places, now, do you mind if I do a singing call? Because I'd love to do a singing call at C1, but I've been told that none of you want it. And a lot of dancers said to me, we've got nothing against doing a singing call. It's always been the callers who told us that we don't want them. And I actually called a couple of C1 dancers where we did a pattern singing call each tip. And some of the dancers come to me afterwards and said, wow, we love that.
Mhm.
So actually, I agree with you. At high challenge is a different activity in a way, and I think that's a fair call. Um, for my own, for what I enjoy doing with the activity, it just doesn't get my interest. For
Mhm.
me, I want to be a facilitator of dancing, not robotics. And I know hundreds of people who would love going along and just doing a fairly robotic, high level, mentally taxing session C3B or something. And that's tremendous. I would never say, well, that's wrong, because if that's what people enjoy, it's what they enjoy. But for me personally, as a caller, I want to be able to call where people can dance and really enjoy themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think part of the problem too is that too many people have uh, moved up, say, from advanced to C1, and they go out to a dance not really being capable of dancing, and I mean dancing
Mm,
C1, because C1 certainly can be very, very danceable.
mm,
Other levels can be. Uh,
absolutely.
you know, you get into some of the concepts, of course, there. Again, we're dealing with people who need too much help, then they're not dancing, and that's too bad. It's I know I used to get a bit of flack because I expect you to dance at challenge level when you went to a dance. It wasn't a place to practice and get better at. It was you were
Mm,
already good enough, just like a plus level dancer. If they're going to break
mm,
down and scoot back or walk and dodge, well, they're not going to be dancing. You know.
mm.
So anyhow, um, let's move along here. Oh yeah, uh, how would you describe yourself in one word?
Mm, yeah. Mm, unusual.
Oh, okay. How about your friends and family? Would they use the same terminology?
Oh, they'd have some different words probably for me.
Yeah.
No, actually, they'd probably all agree with the unusual line, actually.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, look, I've always said to people, being born into square dancing and spending my life around square dancing, I'm going to be a little bit strange. Come on.
okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like they say about becoming a caller. You go, like I use the marble method to teach new callers. You're familiar with that?
The marble method.
Yeah.
No, I'm not.
You get 7 marbles the first day, and each day you spit out a marble. And when you've lost all your marbles, you're then a caller. Um,
Uh, I should have seen that. I should have seen that coming, actually. Yes.
yeah. Yeah. Um, oh, let's see. How about some embarrassing moments? Either behind the mic or in front of you happening.
Um, ooh, I've had a few good ones over the years. Actually, one of my first memories as a caller was when I was probably, I'm going to say 9 or 10, and I was away calling at a dance and having a great time. And then I noticed that the dancers had stopped moving. And me being pretty young and inexperienced, I'd kept on calling, and I called about 5 calls, and they just stopped, and I could not figure out why. Um, and then just the light bulb lit up. And my microphone cord had fallen out from underneath my microphone, and they hadn't heard a word I'd said for about the last 30 seconds. Um, and which is why I've always picked up now that I was hold the microphone, one part holding the microphone, part holding the cable, so that never happens to me again. Um, Embarrassing moments. Ooh, actually, I can't say I've had a lot. Certainly not a lot that spring to mind. Um, there are occasions where I've got tongue tied when trying to call, which has created some interesting results. My favorite moment was the fact that after each tip, I'd usually say either have a break or go and have a rest. And then one time I changed mid sentence and basically told dancers to go have a breast. That was awkward.
I did a class one time, and at the end of the class, I would always say, thank your partner, thank your corner, and take a week. And of course, one lady finally came up and she said, I wish you wouldn't say that. I said, say what? She said, you always tell us to take a leak. So I quit saying that. Anyhow, yeah. I'm going to have to start a whole new YouTube channel for callers with embarrassing moments because I don't know. Maybe I've just been calling so long that eventually you get lots of embarrassing moments or funny things. It's just the silliest things in the world. How,
Yeah.
how, how many times have you had anybody come up and complain about the sound?
Quite often, although my best explanation of people saying about sound being wrong, typically it'll be someone who's been towards the back of the hall who's been in a bad square. And usually you'll get somebody come up and say the sound's bad, we can't hear. And then usually I will call the next tip. I will not change the sound at all. I'll just make it an easy tip to make sure they don't break down. And then they'll walk up at the end of that tip, say, thank you, that was much better.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, look, I generally speaking, as a caller, you can judge from looking at people while you're calling what the sound is like.
Mhm.
If you can see the dancers aren't moving to the beat, the odds are the music's too low. If you can see them starting to hear you, well, your voice is too low. And generally speaking, you can tell from dancers' facial expressions if you're too loud as well. So,
Mhm.
yeah. So generally speaking, I think, yeah, dancers saying that the sound's bad is generally because unfortunately they've been in a bad square. And I I was always told when I first started calling that the best solution to bad sound is to find a better square to dance in.
That's good. I always make a big show of turning the knobs, and I say, now dance up close to the front so you can
Yes.
signal me if you need different sound. And I twist my controls all around. And as
Mm.
soon as they go away, of course, I put them back to where they were. And invariably, partway through the next tip, you say, how's that sound, by the way? And they say, oh, yeah, that's great.
my my favorite memory ever actually was I was at a dance. Actually, it was only last year, and there's about 6, 7 different callers on the program, and there is a very, very new caller who said to me, "Oh, I'm very nervous about getting the sound right." I said, "Well, I'll tell you what." They said, "Jaden, are you going to be on the floor dancing?" I said, "Yep." They said, "Well, can you give us a sound check? Just tell us if it's right. I said, not a problem at all. And they had their voice too low. The unfortunate thing was they didn't look my direction once for the entire tip. They were looking at their pilot square on the bottom corner, and it is actually interesting as a caller, traveling the world. I think we've all called in halls which, no matter what we did, sounding them was going to be impossible. But yeah, I agree with you actually. Yeah, you turn the knobs to make yourself look busy, and then
Yeah.
but it's always the way that the dancers with bad hearing go to the back of the hall, and the dancers with very sensitive hearing go to the very front.
Yeah. So did you like school?
I can't say I did. I actually I was homeschooled for a few years as well. And which was a fortunate thing in a way because it allowed a bit of flexibility, which was helpful when I was trying to make a go as a caller as well, even at that age. Um, I I enjoyed a lot of the subjects at school, but I mean, socially, I was mixing. Well, I was going to square dances 3 times a week when I was at school, so I was more used to mixing with um, people at a square dance than people my own age at school. So, um, but no, I enjoyed maths. I was always a mathematics sort of person. I always liked things where it's nice and black and white. What I liked about mathematics is the correct answer is always a correct answer.
Mhm.
I was never very good at English or any subjects like that, which were more, um, which were there's more variation in what could be right or wrong.
Mhm.
Um, and I've never been a wordsmith, so English was definitely not my strong point.
Ah,
Um,
well, on the social side of that in school, did you have a girlfriend?
in school,
Yeah.
um, not not till probably like 16 or so.
Hmm.
Um, oh, I did actually no, I tell a lie. When I was about 5, there was one girl at school who was going to marry me. Actually, I forget that now. So yes.
Uh, so do you keep in contact with her?
No, no, no,
Man,
funny enough, I don't.
I mean, something serious like that. My goodness, she's probably heartbroken. You know.
And
Well,
I'm probably the only one who still remembers that.
yeah, yeah. So, when was your first kiss and with who? Other than your
Uh,
folks, you know.
um, oh, good Lord. Um, with a person.
Yeah, that's yeah. Let's
Um,
let's keep it
with with
off the beach side.
with with a girl on a particular date.
Mm, yeah.
I I actually could not tell you what age, to be quite frank. I could not tell you when. I have a very photographic memory, so usually I'm very good at remembering exactly when things happen. But that one actually couldn't tell you when it was.
So that's pretty inconsequential activity. Ah,
That's one way to word it. Yes.
yes, yes. Just call me Dr. Freed. So how does that make you feel? Uh, uh, when do you get nervous calling?
um, Actually, I've got to say I don't get particularly nervous calling usually, and I've always found it fascinating because a lot of callers have said to me that before they call in front of even 1 or 2 sets, they get really nervous. And when I say I don't, I think that can be, I don't know, a few callers who don't get nervous, and it's easy to take that as being cocky or arrogant. But it's actually, for me, if you it's about having confidence that you know what you're doing. And if you've done the hard yards and learnt the technical knowledge and you have confidence that you're going to do a good job, then it's natural that you're not going to be super nervous. But I would say it doesn't actually come down to number of people on the floor. I've called to, several hundred people and not being nervous. It comes down to sometimes who's on the floor. I think probably the most nervous I've ever been was the first American National that I attended. And you get up in, the main hall and there's, 30, 40 guys standing there watching you who you've grown up idolizing. And that's probably the most nervous I've ever been, because even though you can do a good job, put in that situation, you don't tend to rationally think. But I was very, my first ever call at an Australian National Convention, which was quite a few years ago now. I remember getting told that because of my first ever call at a national, and most of the callers never heard you, there's gonna be a huge amount of callers sort of standing up the back corner, all standing there watching you. So make sure the moment you walk out on stage, you don't look at them because you're gonna get nervous. And of course, you walk out on stage, look to your right, and bang, there's about 20 callers standing there observing you. And I think that's the only time I've ever literally shaken all the screws out of the microphone. But
Well,
no, nowadays I'd say I more get nervous when I get up to call, say again, challenge or something like that, which I don't tend to call very often, because I call mainstream at the moment 3 to 4 times a week, and when I was doing 10 groups a week, I was calling it 7, 8 times a week. So mainstream plus I call a lot, so you have that natural confidence that you're going to be fine. Advanced I don't call as much, and C1 I only call when I travel. So I think when you do something like that, you get more nervous because you just don't have that same confidence in you that it's going to go well. But yeah, the first caller school I went to, I was told about the tip that if you're super nervous, just imagine your audience is naked. I've got to say, doing that when you're calling a square dance does not tend to help you a lot.
no.
Because that makes sight calling a whole different thing.
Yeah. Depends on the age group too, I think.
I was not going to say that.
No. I'm of a certain age that I can say that.
Yes, I'm not that silly.
No. So, if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Ooh.
Doesn't have to be for calling, of course.
Reading people's minds would be very, very useful, actually.
Ooh.
I would take reading people's minds, because that would help in calling and outside calling as well. That would be a wonderful superpower to have.
I don't know. I don't think I want to know. I don't want to know what they're thinking about me. Say, that stupid caller. Where do you get that stuff from? Well, I'll tell you. Now I'm getting a nasty little buzz out of my speaker.
Yeah, I'm hearing
here,
that too.
and I don't know where that's coming from. How's that?
That's better.
That's good. Okay. It's my equipment here. So do you have a long range goal or goals, you know?
One, the calling side first. I mean, essentially speaking, my goal is to call for as long as I want to, not have to stop calling because the activity doesn't survive. That's so essentially that's my first goal, is that I'm able to, in 50 years or something, I'm able to hang up the microphone when I want to, not when I'm forced to, because there's no one left to call for. So I believe I've had a very good run in square dancing. And I was talking to Brian about this before we got started. Is I've been able to travel the world and get paid to do so, and I've got friends in probably over 100 different cities around the world. So I've had a good run, and I just want to put back into square dancing. And if by the time I'm gone, square dancing is still existing and existing well, then I'll be happy. So certainly in square dancing, that's my long-term goal. And in life, my goal's not that too dissimilar. Just to I aim to be a full-time caller all my life if I possibly can. That is my goal. I've had a good 10 years doing it, so I'm not ready to change yet.
That's good. Can you tell us anything about yourself that people would never guess?
Ooh. Mm. That it. That's an interesting one. See, that's a challenging one because I don't know what people would guess about me, so it's hard to know what they wouldn't guess. I'd actually say one thing is that actually one thing I'd say is that I am completely useless with technology and computers compared to what most people would expect. Most people who know me assume that I'm going to be a computer nerd who can fix their computer for them. And I'm probably the most useless person with technology of anyone I know that's around in my generation. Yeah, that question's actually stumped me a little bit, that one.
Oh, well, I'll let you think about that one.
I'll ponder on that for a few minutes.
Yes.
Yes,
Well,
you've left me speechless, which is a skill not many people have been able to do over the years. So,
well, I hope not too many dancers pick up on that. Dancers can be cruel, you know. Along those lines, then, what do you do for a hobby or hobbies?
um, I enjoy sport more so watching than participating nowadays, but I still like to participate when I can. In Although my favourite two sports are not two sports, but most people will be familiar with over there is Australian rules football and cricket.
Hmm.
Well, actually, I will say the Canadian and USA cricket teams are doing very well for themselves. So but no, I enjoy watching sport. I enjoy board games. I have you spoke to Barry Watson last week, who has about 2 million board games. I'm only about 1.9 million behind him, but
Yeah.
and yeah, but I also really enjoy traveling. For me, whether it's overseas or just around Australia, getting out and traveling and seeing things is a great pleasure. And that's one of the great things about calling is I get to combine that interest with my job.
Hmm.
So I'm very fortunate in that way.
Have you done any cruises?
No, I haven't actually. I've never been I've never been on a cruise ship, although that's on the to-do list over the coming years. I'm returning to the USA for a calling trip next year starting this year in the end of December and into January next year, which will be my first trip to the States in 5 or 6 years.
Hmm.
So we're actually looking at doing a cruise out of America while we're over there. But yeah, it's unfortunately there's no real square dance cruises out of Australia because we don't have a huge number of dancers here. We only have about maybe 1,000 dancers in the country at best. But that's in the entire country, and we're almost as large as the USA. So it's a fairly spread out dancer population. So to do a square dance cruise here is quite a challenge.
Hmm.
But I'd certainly calling on a square dance cruise is one of the few bucket list items that haven't been able to tick off yet. So that's certainly there on the goals list.
Do you have a favorite childhood memory?
Ooh. Well, we used to growing up, we traveled a lot. I was very fortunate that we got that I got to travel around the country as a fairly young child. So I've got probably most of my favorite memories are from holidays we had. Um, but I'd also say on like even a calling front, I opened my first club in Australia. I should preface this by in Australia, most clubs are caller run. We don't have many committee run clubs in Australia. The majority of clubs are caller run. We start from ourselves, we run them ourselves. So I was 14 when I opened my first club. And from probably when I was born into the activity, I'd had the goal of being a caller run in my own club. So that day of opening my own club and was a very, very, very fond memory because that was the day I felt like I'd achieved my goal I'd had since I was born. So that day always stands out as a highlight.
Hmm. Good. Uh, what's your favorite food?
Most people who know me would say just about anything. Um, if I had to pick a last meal, ooh, hmm, you know, I'm going to go. I'm going to say I'd have roast pork or pork belly served with mac and cheese.
Oh, so do you perceive that this might be a situation where you'll have a last meal? You know where most people are when they consider their last meal. They're in prison.
Oh, I know. I'm not planning on doing that, but you know,
Okay.
I
But
mean, for good news, I mean, we don't have the death penalty in Australia, so we don't actually have last meals even in prison
oh,
here.
okay.
So
Well, that's good. Well, I suppose if you know that sooner or later someone's gonna say you got a week, you know,
mm,
make a menu.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Got to be very careful about those things. Um, do you? Uh, Let me think. Beer, mixed drinks, or abstain?
Um, ooh, depends on the time. I like beer, also like mixed drinks, so I'll be boring and sit on the fence there.
Okay. Well, that's not boring. That, that's
Um,
that's fine.
well, I'll probably drink more beer than the others. So
Okay. Let's move into the have you ever situation. You probably are familiar with that.
this could be interesting.
Yes. Have you ever ridden a motorcycle?
No,
Okay. Have you ever jumped out of an airplane?
no, and don't ever intend to either.
Oh, come on now. You got, you never know.
The
There might,
the the only time
are
I
you,
ever plan to jump out of an airplane is if the airplane's about to crash.
or on the ground, right? Yeah,
Oh yeah, well, exactly on the ground. Yeah, exactly
yeah.
right.
Well, if the plane's about to crash and you jump out of I don't, okay. Okay. Have you ever flown in a hot air balloon?
No, that's on my to-do list.
Good, good. It's fantastic. Scuba dive?
No, I'm not doing very well on these answers, am I?
Well, it's just a different culture.
Exactly.
You know, have you
Well,
worked in a factory?
no, I've only ever held one job, which is full-time calling.
Hmm. Okay. Have you ever pulled taffy?
I can preface it by saying I don't even know what taffy is, so the answer is probably no.
Probably. Taffy is
That's not a term I.
it's a
Okay,
particular kind of candy, and it's like having elastic dough, and you just keep pulling it back and forth, back and forth.
okay. The answer is no. Then there's probably another word in Australia we'd use for the same thing. I've never heard the term taffy, to be honest.
Okay, well, we'll wait for the
Um,
question period because we've got a few um,
okay, we.
folks that might
I
know.
think in general, I think Australia would just call them lollies as opposed to using the word taffy. But no, I haven't pulled it though. No,
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, you haven't pulled it. Well, then you haven't pushed it either. Uh, have you been in the armed forces?
no,
Ridden a horse?
no.
Play a musical instrument?
Yes. Not particularly well, but yeah, I learnt piano when I was growing up, and I've been trying on and off to learn guitar for about 7 or 8 years, and still very slow progress. But that's something I'd like to be able to do. I'm very I'm very envious of the people who can play 10 different instruments, who can look at an instrument and learn to play it like that. That
Uh-huh.
is a skill I wish I had. Actually, you asked
It-
what superpower I wish I had earlier. Maybe being able to play more musical instruments. I'll add into that list too.
well, actually, that skill doesn't come up much in day-to-day living.
Mm,
You know, it's like I
very true.
go to the bank for withdrawal, and they say, "Hey, can you play a ukulele?" Sure. Give me you know. Anyhow, have you done karaoke?
Yes.
Ah, a lot or
Not very often. It's actually I've done it more so when I've been traveling overseas than I have in Australia, but
mhm. And with a beer.
more than one, but
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Is there anything? Oh, are you married?
No.
No. Okay. Have you got any kids?
No.
Okay. Maybe I should have asked that the other way around. Uh,
That is the modern world, yes.
yes. Yeah. Um, have you had the experience of calling for gay group?
Yes, I have. I called for one in the United States, and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. It was one of those things where wasn't sure what to expect, but it was I really enjoyed it. It was one of the most fun groups of dancers I've ever called for. So definitely like to do that again in future trips. We don't have a gay group in Australia as far as I'm aware. Um, so certainly on future trips to the USA, I'd enjoy doing that again.
Super. Um, so next year you're going to be going to the States,
Mm,
and is that
yes.
for the nationals? Oh,
No, I'm actually in the USA. I'm calling the feature caller for the Midwinter Festival in Oregon in January.
oh, okay.
So yeah, I'm feature caller for the Midwinter Fest in Oregon, and I'll be yeah, we're going to be over there for a few weeks before that, and um, yeah, calling in a few different parts of America, and still talking to a few people about adding some extra dates to that. So yeah, it's been a long time. 2019 was the last trip I did over there, so it's going to be good to get back and dust off the passport again.
That's good. That's great. So, do you have anything to add to this? I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience here shortly. But do you
Mm.
have anything that you'd like to add?
Um, a couple of thoughts on square dancing and calling, if I may. Just to sort of add into what we were talking about earlier. I was always taught in calling, but calling is actually a pretty simple job. Our job is to ensure that dancers enjoy themselves. And so it doesn't, that's what I was sort of saying earlier, that if you've got a group of dancers who want, high-end challenging robotic dancing, then you offer them that because they'll enjoy themselves. You've got a young group who want it fast and difficult, you give them that. You've got an old group who can barely walk and you give them something slow and enjoyable. Our job, to me, if we just look at it as if the people here tonight enjoy themselves, we've done our job, then I think we are more effective as callers. I think if we can get lost in trying to be just even choreographically, and you said about this earlier yourself, is I think we can get lost in trying to be too challenging or too difficult or too technical. Our job is just to let them dance and enjoy themselves. And the other thing on square dancing is I just think we need to exude positivity as an activity. I think the greatest flaw we have in square dancing is the fact that because we don't have the numbers we used to, it's become a lot of negativity around square dancing. Everywhere you go, you hear people talking about the good old days and what we used to have and how the numbers have dropped. And unfortunately, that is not the way you sell something. And if you were a new person walking into square dancing and all you hear is people saying that it used to be bigger, it used to be better, you're not going to stick around. So I think we have to really focus in on positives. I mean, and you said yourself earlier that you called last night for a dance that had one square in Alaska. Well, it's only one set, but one set's better than no sets. And we had last night we had a club dance where we only had just over a set. I mean, it was over 100 degrees yesterday here, and our hall doesn't have air conditioning, so it but we had just on a set, but we had a great fun night of dancing. So you come away being positive that we've had a great enjoyable night rather than looking at, well, we only made a set. And I just think if we're going to save square dancing and really help it thrive, then we have to be positive no matter where we're at. Even if the numbers drop further, we've still got to be positive about what we still have. And people are always saying, how can we promote the activity? How can we get more new people in? To me, we focus on getting new people in. We need to focus on what we present to the new people when they walk in the door.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not positive and happy about what we have, then there's no point getting people in the door because we're not going to keep them.
That's true.
And yeah, I think that's probably the two main points I'd add in. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That is one of my questions that I sometimes ask is, do you see the glass half full or half empty? And hopefully I get the answer is it's half full. It's, and it'll get fuller if maybe.
Well, I think the great strength square dancing has is the base qualities of the activity are always going to be there. The aspect of fun and friendship, the social aspect, and the fact that we are unique because my partner and I have recently started to go do rock and roll dancing or ballroom dancing, which is great fun, but you're dancing with one person all night. We've got line dance groups where you dance by yourself all night. The social element of dancing with 7 other people, there's not very many dance forms that have that. We're not the only one, but there's not many. And that aspect, and the fact that square dancing is a lifestyle, it's not just something you can do, you go do once a week. Most people who square dance, they're going out to weekends, they're traveling the country, they're traveling the world, so I'm a glass half full because I think no matter what age you are, no matter who you are, those enduring qualities of square dancing, I should say, will always be there. And yeah, I just think no matter what happens to the numbers, we have to just grit our teeth and pull through, because I'm very confident that there will be brighter days ahead for us.
Mhm.
I'm going to tell you that your whole outlook is wrong. The glass is not half full. The glass is not half empty. The glass is refillable.
I like
Yeah,
that.
that's a very good point.
Yeah.
And in our case, that's what it constantly is. Like we're constantly bringing new dancers in and doing more stuff. And you know, the negative sides of it, they are what they are, and they happen to be there. But in our case, all we can do is try to bring in as many new dancers as possible and expose as many
Mm,
people as possible.
And keep them.
yeah.
Since you're a new newer younger caller, have and you're full time, have you been doing any square dance training in any of the local schools or colleges?
No, I haven't. It's something which I've been wanting to do for a while, but nothing's really happened on that front yet.
Yeah,
There's been a couple of
because when I was younger, like when I was like 18, 19 years old and unemployed, um, I went and did a square dance program for the local high schools, and I did like 3 or 4 different high schools. I would go in for like 2 weeks at a time and do their winter square dance program that they would have, because it was required for them to do some kind of a dance program in their gymnastics program. So either, or their gym program. So either they were doing or sorry, gym physical education, whatever you call it, anywhere wherever you
mm,
are. So yeah, so they're required to do some kind of a dance program as part of their physical education. And so we would do like 2 weeks, and then as part of that, the school would have a budget to be able to pay a caller to come in and do that kind of stuff. And so
oh yeah.
you can make a little extra money, and you
Mm,
can promote square dancing amongst young people,
mm,
which would then give square dancing a little bit more of a positive name than typically what they have. Because the young people, when if they learn square dancing in school, typically it's to, you know, 80-year-old records, and
mm,
it's awful, and
yeah.
it's not a positive experience for them. But if you have a caller, and when I say caller, I mean a younger caller such as yourself,
Mm,
who they can look at and say, oh yeah, well, he's not 90 years old,
mm,
because a lot of the callers who would go to schools here, like in Vancouver or whatever, they're all retired guys who have all the time in the world. They can go to the school, but again, they're in their 60s through 90s, and it doesn't give a positive side to square dancing. But
mm,
I would feel that since you're a full-time caller and you have a little bit of time on your hands, you could probably successfully do something like that
mm.
to
Yeah,
bring in younger people. And
no, absolutely.
not only that, but also you can do the same kind of thing that they did at Tech Squares, which is have a younger group of people that are in
Mm,
college level
yeah.
students, because
Mm,
that's what they have at MIT. They have their college program requires a certain amount of physical education credits, and
mm,
the square dancing acts as their physical education credits.
mm,
So that's how some of those students there just take the square dancing to get their physical education credits, and they end up getting hooked on it. And most of
mm,
those dancers end up dancing all over the world in their jobs that they
mm.
have, and they just promote square dancing all over the world amongst those kinds of people.
No, that's a great idea, and yeah, I've it's something I've looked into, but nothing's really developed yet. But yeah, you're 100% right, Brian, and it's actually interesting just on what you were saying there about the impressions people have. Something we're actually fortunate about in Australia is, whereas in America and I assume Canada as well, people think of square dancing of all the old connotations, hay bales and fiddles and banjos and all that stuff. In Australia, square dancing actually has such a low profile. I'd say most young people wouldn't even know what it is if you asked them. So actually,
Even better.
most people, yes, most people in Australia who you mentioned square dancing to, of a younger generation, would say, well, we have no idea what it is. So it actually makes it easier in a way to promote to people, because they don't have the same connotations that a young person in America would.
Right.
That doesn't make it, but most of our young dancers in Australia, and I assume this is the same over there, probably 90. We actually have quite a fair few young dancers in Australia. Certainly in my home state of Victoria, we have quite a strong population, but 99% of those are people who were born into activity, their parents danced, and they've just grown up around square dancing. And which makes it easier because to your average young person, square dancing is just not something which they're going to walk in and do.
Right.
Having um having people who have grown up in square dancing, well, if you grow up in it, it's not that strange to you. You're used to it.
Hmm.
So, but I strongly believe that we need to find ways to get more youth involved because we can survive as an activity dancer wise on our current market. Because I assume this is the same over there. Probably 90% of the learners we get in the door in square dancing here are recently retired people who have just retired and now looking for something to do. That is the bulk of our learner classes here,
Right.
which,
Well, your typical audience are people where their children are at least 12 or 13 years old, and they can stay at home
mm,
without having a babysitter. Because
yeah,
one of the biggest expenses that they have is having to have a babysitter at home.
mm,
And so once their kids are old enough to look after themselves, then the parents are willing to get out of the house and do something for fun.
mm. And this
And
is actually,
yeah, unfortunately,
um,
movies are probably the easiest thing for them to go do, but really you want them to learn how to square dance.
but I think on that, this is where as an activity we can start to get more young people involved. I did a talk quite a while ago for Mel Wilkerson's Zoom sessions where I spoke about bridging the gap to getting youth in. And one thing I spoke about there is with the age of people we have in square dancing now, if we think we can just go and get people in their 20s or 30s in the door now, we're probably kidding ourselves. We need to gradually move down. And an example of that is um, whereas most of our new dancers at the moment are recently retired, if we can go and get I think empty nesters is a term used in America as well. If we can
Yep.
get the empty nester age category, well, that's sort of one generation below recently retired generally. And that's
Yes.
actually something our group, um, before we had a good learner class last year when we had a couple of squares graduate. And I'd say before last year's class, 90% of our home group were retired, whereas we had quite a few people in last year's group who were empty nesters. The kids have either grown up and moved out or old enough to be responsible for themselves, as you say, but they're not retired. So that's just brought the age down a little bit. And um, I've always said if we want to get people in their 20s and 30s in the door to square dancing, we have to get people in their 40s and 50s in the door first.
Right.
To
Um,
some extent, one of the things that's missing, of course, is when we talk about the younger people that have kids that you can't leave, you have to pay a babysitter for, is to
mm,
provide the babysitting situation. And you start getting even more marketing ability that way. You find out who locally is offering babysitting services, and you say, "Hey, look, I call square dancing 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock Tuesday nights. Are you free?" And depending on the size groups you have and whatnot, you may have 2 or 3 different babysitters. It's really cheap employees to take care of a situation where you might get uh, more more of the younger dancers out. Once you get something like that going, it snowballs. I did that when I was living in the States with one of my clubs, where the club members had kids who they didn't want to square dance, but they wanted to babysit and make money. So we rounded them up. We said, okay, you can go off in that room, take the little kids. You have to have the babysitter training course, all that kind of stuff. And we paid them more than they would have made if they went out, uh, in the neighborhood, sort of a thing. And as a result, we had a lot more people. So there's a possibility there for people to think of.
one of the and actually it's a good idea, and I can remember growing as a really young person in the activity. Used to go to most clubs or special events, and there was a room out the side where all the kids were in, and
Hmm.
back when even just 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I was growing up in the activity, well, you might have had 10, 15 kids in that room. Nowadays, there might be 2 or 3 of them. But I think our great challenge, and something I spoke about, on the other presentation I did quite a while back, is the challenge we have as an activity. We need to do things like that to help be more appealing to young people. But at the same time, doing that with the small number of young people we have is very challenging.
Right.
An example, there's been a couple of groups. I know there was a group in South Australia, which is a state to the west of where I am, who did a separate youth session. And the idea was brilliant, except for the fact that to do a separate youth session, you had to be able to get youth in the door to do it. And something I'm very strong on is, as an activity, the natural tendency when you run a business is to cater to the people you have. The problem is, in square dancing, if we cater to the people we have too much, we're actually then going to struggle to attract anyone younger, because the people we have now are mostly of an older age bracket. So if we cater to who we have, then we might be turning activity too far to the point where we can't get youth. An example I've used of that is just the times you run sessions. When I started 20 years ago, clubs over here were running 8 till 10 o'clock. Well, nowadays, most of us are starting at 7 o'clock, running through to 9:30. And I know groups which run 6:30 start. I know quite a few clubs which start their learners at 6 o'clock or 6:30. Well, if you're retired, that's marvelous. If you work till 5 o'clock, there's no way in the world you're going to get to a class by 6 or 6:30. So that's a good example. If we cater to who we have, we'd start really early. But by doing so, we rule ourselves out of getting younger people who we need.
Another thing that, of course, I'm going to be starting it here in Cochrane. We have a number of sports bars and country western bars. And I know when I first started, drinking was a taboo thing. It was really, really flouted as, you must not drink, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? These adults are pretty well responsible people. They can drink and walk, and you get out there and give them the most simple. I mean, you circle left and right, and the whole group make a left-hand star, make a right-hand star, swing your partner, promenade. So that's that simple. And the socializing happens, and they don't even know it, but they're being indoctrinated into square dancing made the night fun. So when you say, hey, look, I have a square dance group. We just get together and square dance. We go out afterwards for our drinks. The younger crowds, their night doesn't start till 10, 11 o'clock at night for a lot of them. So go out and, go to where they are. Get involved as an activity. So does anybody else have any other questions they want to ask Jaden? We lost Kerry. He's probably going, oh, there he is. Oh, you know what? Somebody else left and came back. Oh, Liz went out and came back, and it shifted every picture I have here. Don't change your seats, folks. It confuses me. I'm an old guy.
No, I just got cut out.
Yeah. You timed out. Okay.
It was when you said about babysitting, I thought, yes, I like that. One of the things that got me square dancing was I could get away from my 4 children for a few hours on Thursday night. I had triplets plus another one, and Thursday night was mom's night. You found your own ride to the basketball, whatever. And they were a little too young to be left on their own. Well, the big brother wasn't, but he, killed them. But give them babysitting. A lot of people go where there's babysitting. Encourage women to dance as men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a situation where my Monday night class is in a sports complex, huge, and it's a beautiful setup and everything. But we're on the second floor, and on the first floor there's multiple hockey rinks of ice, and the people bring their kids in, and they just stand around talking. And for the life of me, I can't get them to come upstairs, and say, look don't waste your time, come on up, do some dancing. So I'm working on that aspect yet.
Something else I actually might add in, Joe, when we're talking about points to add, the other thing I think square dancing has to look at and how we exist, and this something which I know is becoming a big talking point now, is around our pricing and how much we charge. The fact of the matter is, I strongly believe that the prices that most groups are charging, and this is a problem which exists across all over the world as far as I'm aware, certainly in America and Australia, and I assume Canada as well, is we don't have enough money in the activity compared to what we should, considering what's being charged. I still see flyers on Facebook all the time for dances in the States where it's $5 or $6 entry, which to me is a real shame, because other than we are completely underpricing what we have, we are not even giving ourselves a fighting chance to fairly pay our callers as a starting point. And unfortunately, there's not much we can do, because there's been so many times where I've been asked to call a dance and they've said, well, we'll pay X amount, which is way under. And I've said to them, I will not work for that amount. And I've actually had a couple of clubs who've been like, well, maybe we could charge a bit more and pay you. But then, of course, there's some guy down the road who'll do the dance for $100. And ultimately, as a caller, then you don't have a booking at all. So it's very challenging. But I think this is where, and I've said to a lot of people in the US in the last couple of years, in Australia, we can do this a bit better because most of our clubs are caller one. So we can set for prices that we deem necessary as a caller. And this is where I've said, in my opinion, most of the comments I've heard from Americans, and I assume this problem exists in Canada as well, is around issues such as, the rush to plus, that all clubs want to do plus rather than mainstream or SSD, or the clubs are charging too little, whatever. Well, the way to bypass those problems is to run your own club. And I've said to people, but in my opinion, if you're not happy with the situation in square dancing, start your own club. And I think, I genuinely believe that something America could do to start to turn the activity around is to actually go for some caller run clubs. And there's nothing against committee run clubs. I've called for lots of committee run clubs that have been wonderful. But I just think something has to change, especially regarding financial aspect, because club nights charging $5 or $6 or weekend events charging $30 or $35 is just not possible, because with the numbers we have now as callers, we're being asked to work for money which is just not, to be honest, it's just not fair or reasonable.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. And it's the kind of a thing, when you're not in the workforce yourself, you sort of lose track of what people are making and what they can afford. And it's only a matter of a couple of dollars to make a difference between breaking even and making enough money to buy some records, buy music. Even if you use karaoke music, there's an investment. The amplifier, the speakers, computer, it's our choice. But again, the public they really have to start owning up to paying a fair rate.
And the problem we have with this is marketing ourselves. Most activities are charging more than we are.
Yes.
And the problem with that, if you go visit a town and there's 2 restaurants in town, you feel like a steak, and there's 2 restaurants in town. One restaurant is charging $30 for a steak. The other restaurant's charging $10. I guarantee you more people are going to go and pay $30 because the moment you see $10 for a steak dinner, your instant thought is there's got to be something wrong with it. And to be honest, in square dancing, that's what we're doing to ourselves. If you see a square dance advertised, and again, when I say $5, $6, that's you got to remember that the Australian dollar is worth, and my memory serves correctly, I think 100 Australian dollars is something like 70 US or something like that, around that. So the values are a bit different. But in general,
That sounds
you
like the
see,
Canadian dollar.
Yeah.
yeah, because all I know is that about 10, 15 years ago, the Australian dollar was under the American dollar. So for us, it was wonderful to buy new equipment and music and all that. Nowadays, it's a bit of a nightmare. But this is our problem as an activity when we put such low prices on. If you're advertising to new dancers, if we're charging half of what other activities are, the instant thought is, what's wrong with square dancing?
Jaden,
And
can I add something to that? Just from the dancers, I don't know if, can you hear me okay? Because the yellow.
yes,
Yep. Go ahead.
From a dancer's point of view, like when I first started dancing, I didn't have a clue as to what the caller had to do or anything like that. And it wasn't until at some of the national conventions that we had the sessions where the callers came in on a Saturday morning and the dancers could go along. And I went to those sessions, and I learned a lot about what goes on for the callers. And I regard it something like driving a car. You can learn to drive a car, but you never know how that car operates unless you're a mechanic. So if anything goes wrong, you take it to a garage or a mechanic, and you expect that mechanic to know all of that, what they need to know to fix it. With square dancing, it's the same. We are the dancers and we are the drivers of the car. We've got no idea what goes on for a caller's point of view, and we don't realize just how much work that caller has to do to be able to come and not only teach us to dance, but actually to put on dances. And I think we actually stopped having those dancer caller sessions. And not very many dancers attended, which was a little bit sad, because if the dancers really got to know what it takes to do what you do, Jaden, and all of the other callers, I think that we would have more respect for the callers. Like the dancers would have more respect for the callers because they would then understand what actually has to happen. And can I also put a bit of a praise out for Jaden, because last year from Victoria, he took on doing our New South Wales State Convention. He was the convener of our state convention, and he did a terrific job. So, I mean, he had help as well, of course. But yeah, Jaden just takes on these things. And can I also say, just put a praise out for your parents too, because your parents are the backbone of how you've got to where you've got to, and I think that they're great people. So that's all I got to say.
No, that's a good point. That's sort of why I started these things, both sides of the mic, because many people think, well, the caller arrives at a dance, calls the dance, and then disappears for a week or whatever, that we don't have a life on the other side of the mic. We got kids, we got partners, whatever. We have other activities in our life. So most people watch these on YouTube because it's, convenient for them to watch at their leisure, where this particular time, especially in Australia,
Yes.
I'm doing my best. I got the whole country to set the clocks forward a bit for you, so it's not so late or early in the morning. But
Well, actually, for daylight saving time, made it an hour earlier, so it actually went very up a way.
it did.
Yeah, it made it an hour earlier. Yes.
Oh, well, I'll see what I can do.
But even
Yeah,
with that, Mel showed up late.
Yeah. Hi, Mel. Uh,
Good morning. No, I was
least
in
he's-
the caller lab meeting this morning and then just finished breakfast and trying to get the link in on the phone. So it just managed to get in now.
yeah.
Hey, Jaden.
G'day, mate. Good to see you. Just to pick up on something that Eileen was saying there, when she said about the caller dancer sessions in Australia at our national conventions for quite a few years, we actually ran educational sessions to give dancers a sort of background on how we call, what goes into calling, all that sort of thing, with the aim of trying to get more new callers involved. But it more so served as a handy tool for, as Eileen said, for dancers to realise what goes into calling. So it was actually quite a good thing. But just to pick up on what I was saying before with the pricing of the activity, I just think an example of this also is weekend events. I see weekends advertised for, again, $25, $30, $35 a person for a whole weekend. What other activity could you go and get a whole weekend's entertainment for $35? I mean, but unfortunately, a lot of people look at that as a positive. A lot of people say, well, isn't square dancing amazing? We can go and get all this for $30. I'm like, well, unfortunately, that is not a positive. Because in the same way, if we charge, if we said we're going to pay 50 cents for our fruit and vegetables, well, a lot of people would say, well, we can't do that because it's going to leave our farmers bankrupt, which is correct. But unfortunately, when it comes to square dancing, by charging that sort of prices, we're leaving our callers bankrupt. So and this is what I come back to before, I think there has to be a push towards callers. If callers cannot get a better deal through committee-run clubs, then callers have to step up and start running their own clubs, if that's what it takes to adjust the activity.
Yes. Oh, yeah, Mel, go ahead.
Very well said, Jaden. We're along the same line where we look at if we're going to advertise for $5 or $10 because that's what our dancers are used to paying. If we look at our dancers, they're the only ones that are going to come for that price. But if we put a realistic price out for new dancers and start this activity, like I notice a lot of your dance, you're getting a great turnout for a lot of yours, but they expect what they're getting and they expect to pay for what they're getting. Across the board, this is a comment that comes up a lot is if that's what they want to pay is $5 or $10 for a full day dance or $20 for a full day dance, those are the people you're going to get. And they're going to be the advance, they're going to be the challenge. And unfortunately, they're going to be too old to keep paying it because that's their pension fee or that's what it is. And they're not going to come to the dances anymore. And we have totally alienated anybody that's looking for value for money from, your generation or halfway between your generation and my generation. They're just not going to come because expectation is reality. And their perception is the reality of, well, if it's that cheap, it can't be that good. It's just somebody trying to do a hobby.
100%.
Yeah, it's a dilemma, that's for sure. Basically, for a dance, we're not getting anything different for calling a dance for another club than we did 20, 30 years ago.
Well, certainly from my experience in Australia, the going rate for calling a weekend in Australia now is actually less than it was 10, 15 years ago,
mhm.
which is, that's because unfortunately everything's gone up, but the only thing that hasn't gone up is the ticket prices for the dancers.
Yeah.
A lot of our club nights have actually gone up from what they were, but the weekends haven't. And for our 4 weekend events, we include, a couple of meals in it, but we're charging now up towards $80, $90 a ticket for a 4 weekend dance, because that's a fair rate for a whole weekend's entertainment. And it's what you need to charge to ensure that you cover your expenses and that your callers are well paid. But unfortunately, then there's weekends that are running for $30 or $40 a ticket, and those weekends are either losing money or they're asking callers to work for nothing, just about, and it becomes very challenging. And
Yeah, it really does. Well, we're coming up to, well, we're beyond the the normal bewitching hour, but and we can stay on afterwards. But for the interview part, I'll close that off. Okay. So I want to thank Jaden very much for being in the hot seat, and
pleasure.
everybody for joining in. And I'll be turning off my recording in a moment.
Thank you, Joe and Jaden. That was very interesting.